The letter was never sent. It was found among her belongings after October 4, 1970, folded once, placed inside a book she had been reading, handwritten on the kind of plain notepaper that exists in hotel rooms and apartments occupied by people who are always in the process of leaving somewhere. The handwriting was hers, loose and forward-leaning, the kind of handwriting that moves faster than it can be read, that has somewhere to go and does not want to slow down for legibility. It was addressed to her family in Port Arthur, Texas, Dorothy and Seth Joplin. The people who had raised her, worried about her, watched her leave and come back and leave again, and who had watched from a very specific distance, the distance that exists between the Gulf Coast of Texas and everywhere else, as the daughter they knew became a person the world was deciding it had. Feelings about the letter was not finished, or perhaps it was finished and she had decided, in the way that people decide these things without announcement, that finishing was not the same as sending. That what she had written had served its purpose by being written, that the act of putting the words down had done the work the sending was supposed to do, and that the envelope and the stamp in the mailbox were a different transaction entirely, one she was not ready for, or not certain of, or simply did not get to before everything stopped. Nobody knows exactly when she wrote it. The book it was found in was one she had been reading during the Pearl Sessions, which places it somewhere in the summer or early fall of 1970. The last months of her life, though she did not know they were the last months, because people do not know that about their months until afterward, when someone else does the accounting. What the letter said, the specific words, the specific sentences, belongs to the family that received it, and they have chosen, with a dignity that deserves respect, to keep it. What is known is the outline, that it was personal in the way that letters to parents are always personal, that it contained things she had not said directly before, that it circled around certain subjects in the way that people circle around the things they most want to say when they are not entirely certain they have the right to say them directly. What is also known, what the people who were close to her in those months have described, consistently, and with the particular care of people who want to get something important right, is the kind of person she was in the period when that letter was written. And that person, and what she was carrying in the summer and fall of 1970, is the real subject of the letter, whether or not the letter's specific words are ever made public. This is what the letter was about, not the words, the life behind them. Janis Joplin was born on January 19, 1943, in Port Arthur, Texas, the eldest daughter of Dorothy East Joplin and Seth Ward Joplin. Her father was a man of unusual interior life for the context he inhabited, an engineer by profession who read Proust in his spare time, who took his children to art museums in Beaumont, who believed that thinking carefully about difficult questions was not an eccentricity, but a form of respect for being alive. Her mother was practical and loving, and worried in the specific way that mothers worry when a child arrives who feels everything too much and shows all of it. Janis felt everything too much and showed all of it from the beginning. She was the kind of child who made rooms aware of her presence without doing anything particularly remarkable, simply by being fully there, fully attending, fully responding to whatever the room contained. Adults found this quality charming and slightly exhausting. Her peers, as she moved into adolescence, found it threatening in the way that any quality finds itself threatening when it cannot be categorized by the social systems available to teenagers in a small Texas town in the 1950s. Port Arthur was not equipped for Janis Joplin, not because the town was malicious, though some of what it directed at her was genuinely cruel, but because the social machinery of Port Arthur, the agreed-upon dimensions of what a girl should be, how much a person should feel, what kind of ambition was appropriate and what kind was excessive, had been built for a different kind of person, and Janis was simply not that kind. She read voraciously. She painted with a commitment that her classmates experienced as pretension. She listened to music that the radio didn't play, Bessie Smith, Lead Belly, Big Mama Thornton, and talked about it with an enthusiasm that the people around her had no framework for receiving. She was called ugly. She was excluded. She was mocked for her clothes, her face, her enthusiasms, her refusal to modulate herself down to the volume that Port Arthur had decided was appropriate. She carried all of this home every day, and at home there was Seth Joplin, reading his books, asking his questions, and in the way of fathers who understand that their children are being diminished by the world outside the door and can offer only limited protection, being present. Being the one person in Port Arthur who seemed to find Janis's intensity not excessive but interesting, who engaged with her ideas rather than managing them, who did not ask her to be smaller. The relationship between Janis Joplin and her father is one of the least discussed elements of a story that has been discussed extensively. Seth Joplin appears at the edges of the biography, a quiet, bookish man who worked at Texaco, who seems in photographs to have had the slightly abstracted look of someone whose mind is often elsewhere, but his specific influence on his eldest daughter has never been fully traced. What is traceable is this: Janis Joplin, who spent her entire professional life being told she was too much, had at least one person in her early life who seemed to think that too much was the beginning of something rather than the end of it. And that person was her father. She wrote to him, through the years of leaving and returning and leaving again, through the San Francisco years and the Monterey Breakthrough and the Cheap Thrills Summer and the Cosmic Blues Band and the Full Tilt Boogie Band and all the cities and all the shows, she wrote to her parents, not always regularly, not always about the things that mattered most, but consistently in the specific way of someone who has not entirely severed the thread that connects them to where they began, even when that where is complicated and the thread is thin and the distance between the places it connects is enormous. The letter found in the book was not an ordinary letter. It was not the letter she wrote when she had good news to share or when she needed to tell them she was coming home for a few days. It was the other kind of letter, the kind you write when something has been accumulating for long enough that it requires a page rather than a paragraph, when the ordinary correspondence between people who love each other and are not sure how to show it has proven insufficient for what you actually need to say. To understand what had been accumulating, what was looking for a page rather than a paragraph in the summer of 1970, you have to understand the specific texture of the years between Monterey and that summer. Not the texture that appears in the press coverage of those years, which is the texture of a career ascending. The album sales, the concert receipts, the magazine covers, the critical vocabulary reaching for geological metaphors because ordinary musical vocabulary had run out. The other texture, the one underneath, she had become, in the 3 years since Monterey, a symbol, not in a metaphorical sense. Literally a symbol, a figure that the culture had decided represented something larger than any individual person can comfortably represent. She was freedom. She was the unleashed female voice. She was the demonstration that authenticity was possible in a commercial music industry that everyone suspected was designed to sand authenticity down into something more manageable. She was what you could be if you refused to be what the world was telling you to be. This was a version of her. It was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete in ways that the symbol-making process cannot accommodate because symbols require simplicity and Janis Joplin was not simple. She was a specific person, funny, sharp, warm, generous, capable of extraordinary loyalty and extraordinary self-exposure in approximately equal measure, someone who could fill a room with her presence. And then go back to a hotel room and sit alone with something that the performance had not resolved and the applause had not reached. The loneliness that the applause did not reach was not a secret. She spoke about it in interviews, in private conversations, in the specific half-articulated way of someone who is describing something in real time without having fully understood it yet. She talked about the gap between being seen and being known. About the specific feeling of giving everything to a room full of people and walking off stage with the giving unreciprocated in the way that actually mattered, not unappreciated, not unrewarded, but unmet at the level where she most needed meeting. She had tried to resolve this gap through the music itself, by making the performances more complete, more honest, more fully given, by leaving less and less in reserve, by opening more of herself each time, operating on the theory that the distance between herself and the audience could be closed by giving more. The Pearl sessions in the summer of 1970 were the fullest expression of this theory, the most complete, most honest, most fully inhabited recordings of her career, the work of someone who had decided that there was nothing left worth protecting from the transaction. But the gap was not a gap in the music. The music was not where it lived. The music was where she had always put it, and the music had always received it, The music was the one transaction she knew how to complete. The gap was everywhere else. In the dressing rooms and the hotel rooms and the cars between cities and the ordinary human business of being a person in the world when the performance is over and the lights have gone down and it is just you and whatever you have accumulated and the question of what to do with it next. She was writing a letter to her parents in Port Arthur. What do you say, in a letter you are not sure you will send, to the people who knew you before you became something the world had decided to call famous? You say the things you have not said in the ordinary correspondence, the things that require a page because they will not fit in a paragraph. The things that have been looking for the right moment to be said and have been waiting, sometimes for years, because the right moment kept not arriving, and the letters that did get sent were the other kind, the news, the plans, the reassurances, the evidence that things were all right or approaching all right or moving in the direction of all right. She had sent those letters. She had been sending them for years. They were real. The warmth in them was real, the connection they maintained was real. The love that moved through the ordinary words of ordinary correspondence between people who love each other across distance and difficulty was real. But they were not the whole story. They were the part of the story she had found a way to send. The letter in the book was the other part. What the letter is described as containing, by the people who have acknowledged its existence without disclosing its contents, is something in the nature of an accounting. Not a grievance and not a confession, but something between those things. A woman in her late 20s, sitting somewhere in Lowe's Angels with a piece of plain notepaper, trying to say something true to the people who had known her longest about what the life she was living actually felt like from the inside. What it felt like from the inside was not what it looked like from Port Arthur. From Port Arthur, looking at the magazine covers and reading the reviews and watching the trajectory of the career on whatever information reached the Gulf Coast of Texas in 1970, Janis Joplin's life must have looked like vindication, like the proof of something, like the world finally recognizing what Seth and Dorothy Joplin had watched accumulate in their eldest daughter across 17 years in a town that was not able to hold it. The girl who had been called too much, coming back as exactly enough, as more than enough, as the standard by which enough was now being measured. From the inside, it was more complicated than that. From the inside, there was the specific loneliness of being a symbol, of being seen by millions and understood by very few. There was the question she had been carrying for years, without fully articulating, whether the giving that the music required at the level she had always given it was something that had a sustainable form, or whether it was a form of spending from a finite account that did not automatically replenish. There was the growing understanding, not yet complete, not yet resolved, but present and accumulating, that the performances that looked like total freedom were also a form of total exposure, and that exposure at that level, sustained across years, leaves marks that the applause does not reach and the reviews do not address and the magazine covers do not show. There was also the simple human fact of missing. Missing the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable things of a life you have left behind. The smell of the Gulf, the sound of a particular kind of rain on a particular kind of roof, the faces of the people who knew. Your name before the name meant anything to anyone outside of Port Arthur. The letter was in part about missing, about the specific form of homesickness that is not the desire to return to a place. She knew what Port Arthur was and she had made her peace with the impossibility of it, but the desire to be connected across whatever distance to the people who had been there at the beginning. Her parents, Seth with his books and his questions. Dorothy with her love and her worry, which were the same thing wearing different faces. She wrote them a letter in the summer of 1970, and she did not send it, and it was found in a book after everything stopped, and its specific words are not public and may never be. But the life it came from, the accumulation that required a page instead of a paragraph, the things that could not fit in ordinary correspondence. That life is in the music. It has always been in the music. Every recording she left behind is, in some sense, the letter she was trying to write, the attempt to say something true about what it is like to be the person she was, in the life she had, carrying what she carried, giving what she gave. The Pearl sessions, recorded in the same period as the letter, have a quality that even listeners who are not looking for it tend to register without being able to name it. A quality of directness, not the directness of performance, which is its own thing and which Janis had always had in abundance, but the directness of someone who has decided, finally and completely, that there is nothing left worth managing. Nothing left worth protecting from the listener, nothing left to hold back. Paul Rothschild, producing the sessions, has spoken about the atmosphere of those recordings in terms that consistently return to a single quality: honesty. Not technical honesty, that was a given. She was always technically honest in the sense of giving full commitment to every take, but something more fundamental. The sense that the voice on those recordings is not performing honesty but simply being honest, reporting from the interior of an actual life, with all the complexity and contradiction and earned wisdom and unresolved longing that an actual life contains. This is what the letter and the recordings share. They are both attempts made in the same period of time to say something true about what the life felt like from the inside. One of them was addressed to her family in Port Arthur and was not sent. The other was addressed to everyone and has been received by millions of people in the decades since it was made, and is still being received right now by people who press play and hear something that crosses the distance between the speaker and the listener and lands somewhere specific and interior and not easily described. The letter said what the recording said. The recording said what the letter said. They were the same attempt in different forms to do the thing that had always been the central project of her life, to close the gap between what she felt and what the people who mattered to her could receive. To be known, not just famous, to be understood, not just heard. She did not send the letter, but she sent the music, and the music, unlike the letter, found its way. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970. The Pearl album was released in January 1971 and reached #1 on the Billboard charts, the first time one of her solo albums had achieved that. In her lifetime, though she was not alive to know it, Me and Bobby McGee reached #1 as a single. The recordings from those sessions have been in continuous circulation for more than 50 years. The letter remained folded in its book. The book was returned to her family along with the other belongings. Dorothy Joplin, who outlived her daughter by decades, spoke rarely and carefully about the letters she had received across the years, about what it was like to watch from Port Arthur as the world constructed an image of her daughter that was true and incomplete simultaneously, that captured something real and missed something essential, that saw the voice and the stage and the symbol and could not quite see the person underneath who was still, in some fundamental way, the girl who had grown up in their house in Port Arthur and left looking for something she could not have named yet. The letter found in the book was different from the others. Dorothy Joplin knew that immediately. She has not said what made it different, and the knowing is sufficient. She was the mother. She knew the handwriting. She knew the rhythm of her daughter's sentences, and she knew the difference between the letter Janis sent and the letter Janis wrote when she had something to say that she was not sure she had the right to say directly. What Janis had to say in the end is what she always had to say. What the music said, from the first time she opened her mouth in a Port Arthur bedroom with a Bessie Smith record playing on the floor beside her to the last take of Me and Bobby McGee in a Lowe's Angels studio with the headphones still around her neck after the tape had stopped. What every performance said, from the smallest club in the Haight to the half-dark field at Woodstock to the Monterey stage where everything changed. She was here, she felt this. She wanted you to know. The letter was not sent, the music was. The music has been doing the work of the letter ever since, finding the people who needed it, arriving in the specific way that only a voice this honest can arrive, landing somewhere interior and irreplaceable and not easily described, in the way that letters to the people who matter most always land when they are finally, truly, completely sent. She's still sending it. Every time someone presses play, she is still sending it. The letter was never sent, but the voice has never stopped arriving.